Tantor Audio presents The Soul of All Living Creatures, What Animals Can Teach Us About Being Human, by Vint Virga, DVM. Narrated by Vint Virga. The soul is the same in all living creatures, although the body of each is different. Hippocrates. Author's note. The stories I tell in these chapters are true. A few of those mentioned have permitted me to use their real names. In all other narratives, the names and identifying details of those whom I write about, people as well as animals, have been changed in order to protect their privacy and maintain confidentiality. Throughout the book, I refer with intention to individual animals as he or she instead of it, which is customary in our culture. The use of it when referring to animals draws a distinction between them and us, and reinforces viewing them as objects rather than fellow beings. It is clear from all I have written here, I believe passionately that all living creatures, animals and humans, are unique and individual beings. I leave it to the listener to decide for themselves which they feel is more appropriate. Introduction. Lots of people talk to animals. Not very many listen, though. That's the problem. Benjamin Hoff, The Tao of Pooh. I had done all that I could for him. Pongo lay on his side in the run, a stack of threadbare blankets beneath him and jugs of warm water swaddled at his sides. For close to an hour I'd been struggling to get him stabilized, since that moment I'd first caught sight of him as he was carried through the treatment room door. Even when I was tugged away to attend to the stream of other patients who'd gathered that night just inside our doors, a stoic coonhound I'd seen before who'd stubbornly tangled with his seventh porcupine, a threesome of cats who'd delightedly grazed on the children's collection of Halloween chocolates, a raccoon with a snotty nose and runny eyes I feared foretold a distemper, a Newfoundland puppy whose paw had been stepped on, a robin stunned from flying headlong into a plate glass window, and the others taking refuge on that bitter, stormy November night, my thoughts still drifted back to Pongo. He'd arrived at the height of the first wave of patients as the techs triaged each animal amidst a flurry of phone calls, frantic clients, and paperwork. Whisking past the blur of faces lined up against the waiting room walls, Pongo's owners, Claire and Turner Wallace, a graying professor, and his stately wife decked out in their finest clothes for a night on the town, had shunned the gurney the techs rolled to their car. Instead, cradling the whole of his body in a makeshift sling formed by their arms, they maneuvered Pongo through the short maze of hallways leading from reception back to the clinic's treatment room, the hub behind the scenes where we did our most intensive work. Huddled arm in arm together, in a growing puddle from their rain-soaked clothes, they stood behind me watching over my shoulder as I tended to their beloved dog. Ready at hand on every wall surrounding us, tucked into cabinets and tightly packed on rows of shelves, stood most every foreseeable supply, device, and piece of equipment needed to care for our patients each night. Sutures, bandages, catheters, needles, boxes of color-coded syringes, sterile packs of surgical tools, a curious array of oddly shaped instruments uniquely fashioned for animals' bodies, rows and rows of medicine bottles holding powders, injections, and pills, a state-of-the-art formulary of drugs designed to treat whatever ails the body. Within view on either side of us, the surgery suite and a row of runs stood at the ready whenever they were needed, and sprawled on his side before me lay my patient. Pongo, a 2-year-old flat-coated retriever, was the first hit-by-car victim of the night, after dashing toward a poodle in a pickup passing by his home. His long black hair, tangled in mats from being thrust and dragged against the pavement, effused an odor of rain, oil, and asphalt. Yet other than a few contusions and abrasions, I'd failed to find any signs of trauma. His lab work and x-rays were likewise unremarkable. At 85 pounds, his barrel chest and solid frame had served him well. But despite these minor injuries, Pongo's body betrayed it was in crisis. Through the ear tips of my stethoscope, I listened to his heartbeat pound while my fingers searched for a matching pulse. Yet, Running my hands along his veins, I could barely feel the faintest flutter. His pupils gazed beyond me unfocused. His shivering skin felt icy cold. In response to a moment's pressure from my thumb, his dry, ashen gums blushed a gloomy gray pink. Pongo was in progressive shock, if from nothing more than the sheer concussion of his impact with the speeding truck. As a doctor in the emergency room seasoned by 4 grueling years of practice, I'd grown to trust my knowledge and skills. 8 years earlier, as a freshman in vet school, well before my first hospital rounds, I'd learned that animals don't walk on their x-rays, a maxim repeated by our professors to stress the limits of diagnostic tests. As I write these words now, 30 years later, that lesson is borne out time and again. Above all the tests we may run as doctors, ultrasounds, blood work, or MRIs, we must trust in our sense of touch, eyes, ears, and instincts. As I stood next to Pongo weighing our findings, the results of our tests suggested he should be fine. Yet in spite of my searching, something was missing, a piece of the puzzle, a hidden clue, and I was at a loss to find it. I knew that the best I could do for my patient was simply to step back and give him some time. Time to respond to the meds for shock, to the steady flow of sustaining fluids dripping through the IV line, to the soothing warmth of a quiet bed waiting for him in a nearby run. Turning to Dr. and Mrs. Wallace before I stepped away from Pongo's side, I saw in their faces not only their angst but also their bleary-eyed looks of exhaustion. Facing Pongo's mortality had clearly taken its toll on them. So promising to keep in touch with any changes in his condition, I nudged them home for a bit of rest. And leaving Pongo in the care of Melissa, our more than capable treatment room tech, I left to begin removing the quills from my old familiar coonhound friend. Though I checked on Pongo from time to time, it was not until a few hours later, when both exam rooms were at long last empty, and each of the patients I'd seen in them were nestled in cages or runs for the night, or safely back at home tucked in their beds, that I could focus on him once again. After repeating a thorough exam from chest to belly and limb to limb, I stepped back a pace to take in the whole picture. If anything, his condition had worsened. Despite our aggressive supportive care, he lay on his side where I'd seen him last, indifferent to all we had done for him. Each breath he took was a labored effort, a familiar blend of rasping sighs and guttural moans I'd heard before in trauma patients. His eyes drooped half-closed with a far-off focus. His gums remained pale, though I fancied less gray. Though before he flicked his ears to the sound of my voice, now he lay oblivious when I crouched beside him and spoke his name. Despite my best efforts, I was losing my patient. Facing Pongo at 3 a.m., with the lights turned low and the clinic hushed, I surrendered to my growing frustration and sank exhausted to the floor. Too tired to talk, I sat by his side, leaning my back against the wall, while I worked at updating medical records, a daunting, foot-high stack of charts. While my left hand scribbled my thoughts onto paper as diagnoses and treatment plans, my right arm draped loosely on Pongo's chest, lifting and falling with each labored breath. As we shared those blankets in that dim-lit run, I imagined picking up on some vague shift in Pongo, a slight ease in breathing, a softer moan, a lean of his body imperceptibly closer. While I worked at my notes, what at first seemed just whimsy, barely more than a passing thought, in that hour became unmistakably real. I felt his pulse strengthen, his heart rate slowed. But most telling of all, he shifted his focus from some distant planet to there by my side. With the weakest of wags at the tip of his tail, he licked my hand as I spoke his name. In medical terms, he became more responsive, but simply put in other words, Pongo grew present in body and spirit. Pulling his chart from the stack by my side, I pored through the entries on each of those pages, lab tests, exam results, treatments given, technician notes. In spite of his sudden remarkable change, I could find nothing in our care of Pongo that differed that hour from all those before. Nothing, that is, except for the time I spent sharing those blankets with him. With Pongo then nuzzling into my lap, I came to realize the obvious. It wasn't my medical knowledge or skills that had strengthened Pongo's will to live. Instead, it was simply those moments we shared. A soft word spoken, a simple touch. Indeed, those seemingly small acts of caring, I have no doubt, saved Pongo's life. That evening with Pongo 22 years ago forever changed the course of my life as a vet. How I look at the ties that bind me to animals. Their roles in my life, and mine and theirs, took on dimensions I had never known possible. Doors opened into a profound new reality that I had only glimpsed and begun to comprehend. A world of insights into behaviors and relationships. My role had evolved beyond that of doctor to student, philosopher, teacher, and therapist. Since my earliest memories, I was maybe 4 or 5 years old, I've felt drawn to animals by some unexplained force. At holiday gatherings, my parents' dinner parties, or days around town, especially in crowds, I could be found somewhere out of the way, comfortably sitting alone on the ground, with a cat in my lap or a dog close at hand. Sometimes I'd talk to them, other times not. I was simply content to be with them in silence, and escape all the pressure of being with people. Words freely spoken with so much unsaid, unspoken meanings, hidden agendas. With animals, I felt at home. Their messages were clear and true. What mattered in those moments was nothing more than our relationship. Yet somewhere in the process of becoming wiser and growing up, classes in science and analytical thinking, bullies and best friends and lessons learned, the death of our first dog, bringing home a new puppy, parties and dances and kissing a girl, walking alone through the canyons near school or for miles on the beach, sorting everything out. Why is physics so hard? Why is chemistry easy? Why can I not get that girl off my mind? What did she mean last night when she called me? Why does the moon look so orange tonight? Is it because of pollution, or just where it is in the sky? Going off to college, living in the dorms, courses and field trips and countless exams. My sense of belonging with animals diminished. Though I still held those feelings, the bond, the attraction I felt merely being with them, I resolved I would best serve them being a doctor, diagnosing diseases, sewing up wounds, showing I cared with my mind and my hands. Until I met Pongo. I left general medicine several years later, first the emergency room, then my own clinic. While my practice had thrived for those years in between and the challenge of difficult cases endured, I felt something was missing in most of my work. The best medical care, diagnostics, and treatment, while part of the picture, left more unattended, the behavioral needs of my patients and clients. Wondering why I was an hour behind schedule, my technician would softly crack open the door to find me sitting somewhere on the floor with a cat in my lap, or a dog sprawled beside me, discussing with clients their routines at home. The message was clear. So leaving our life in the Oregon foothills, my practice and our friendships we'd formed through the years, my fiancée and I packed up and moved with our dog and 3 cats to follow our dreams, to practice after residencies as veterinary specialists, Tiffany in dermatology and me in behavioral medicine. And though we had both been in practice for years, the work we were meant for had just begun. The soul of all living creatures traverses the world I've discovered since then in behavioral medicine specialty practice, considering all different species of animals from leopards and whales to cats, dogs, and wolves. It delves into the lives of my clients and patients, the problems they've faced, how I've tended to them, where I have helped, when I have failed, and perhaps most of all the lessons I've learned. But this book is as much about people as animals, Exploring behaviors and traits that we share with all sorts of creatures, it endeavors to show what animals can teach us about our own lives. What can a whale say about how we listen? How can an ocelot help us notice more? What can a girl and her fearful cat show us about being sensitive to those that we love? Through unlocking such mysteries of animal behaviors, we can open a door into our own lives for new insights, perspectives, and ways of being. And as much as we're willing, if we listen and notice and embrace what we all hold in common with animals, we can bring more meaning and fulfillment to our lives. Chapter 1. Connection. If all the beasts were gone, men would die from a great loneliness of spirit. For whatever happens to the beasts soon happens to man. All things are connected. Ted Perry. From birth, even before we've begun to focus on what lies beyond our grasp, a world of strange and wonderful creatures gathers together to watch over us. Soft bunny faces on plush baby blankets snuggle with us as we lie in our cribs. Stuffed teddy bears with bow ties and peacoats stand at the ready to help ease our fears. Animal alphabets, murals with monkeys, and paintings of elephants hang on our walls, inspiring us to think and dream, and look beyond the world we know. And at last, when it's bedtime as we drift to sleep, Winnie the Pooh, Peter Rabbit, Babar, and a parade of storybook characters spring from the pages with lives of their own to become endearing childhood friends, their tales retold on countless evenings. Though children may set aside these companions, except perhaps with the closest of friends, in their urgency to feel more grown up, as adults we very much interweave animals into the fabric of our lives, inspiring new symbols that still captivate us. The cars we drive and sports teams we cheer for invoke their image in using their names with visions of emulating some special trait. The stealth of tigers, speed of mustangs, sting of hornets, or strength of bulls. From the stalwart elk of the Hartford group to the sleek fluid borzoi of Alfred Knopf, icons of animals spark in our minds lasting impressions that span generations. In truth, who among us does not feel some longing, an impulse to walk out on life as we know it, if merely for only a week or two, to flee to some destination down under, simply by seeing the Qantas kangaroo? What underlies this attraction to animals? Why are we humans so drawn to them? How is it that animals so touch our hearts merely by naming them, seeing their picture? Why do their images echo inside us, move and inspire us to dare dreaming bigger, leaving impressions for most of our lives? Is the grip they hold on us cultural programming, instilled by logos and ad campaigns, or perhaps just a matter of constant exposure beginning at the earliest age? I believe our connection is rooted much deeper, lit by a spark before childhood memories, more profound than a yearning for superhuman traits, beyond the comfort we find in their touch, their listening ears, or their steady gaze. What I see in their eyes is my own reflection, and a sense that we share much more than we recognize. The people and animals I see in my practice share a bond that defies any logic or reason that explains what it is that they do to our lives. As I sit in between them and look back and forth from human to animal, in a very real sense I am watching a struggle that has occupied humans since our species began. Outside the village of Vallon-Pont-d'Arc in the Rhône-Alpes region of southern France, the Ardèche River flows through sheer cliff canyons flanked by muted gray limestone walls. On a narrow terrace overlooking the valley lies the entrance to the Grotte Chauvet, a vast, primordial underground cavern that shelters some of man's earliest art. Once a lair for Stone Age cave bears, the size of modern Kodiak bears, Chauvet in its floor holds their paw marks and scratches and is littered with bony remains of their prey. As we look to the walls, a different picture unfolds. Trekking back from the ledge lined with scrub oak and ivy, and into the mountain for a quarter of a mile through a labyrinth of breathtaking chambers and galleries, is like plunging backward into the last ice age. Well after the cave bears abandoned the cavern for the tundra and steppe with spring in full bloom, the earliest humans ventured into Chauvet for some unknown reason and left a collection that transcends all time between then and now. Each painting, now 30,000 years old, in its own right is a masterpiece, strikingly rich in style, depth, and form, which viewed together capture scenes from a world that footprints, paw marks, fragments of bones, and carbon dating can't begin to convey. More than 400 animals that then roam the continent with one human figure, a Venus, in their midst, come to life on the walls singly and in panels. But beyond their artistry, what separates them from their brethren found in other caves lies in which creatures the artist portrayed. Aside from the prey then most hunted by humans, reindeer, horses, ibex, and bison, the walls feature many more dangerous species, lions, rhinos, cave bears, and panthers, among other predators that once roamed outside. Yet what stands out clearly, and perhaps is most telling of what brought these artists inside of Chauvet, is that the paintings do not depict a fear of these creatures, but instead celebrate their vitality. The blink of her eyes in a horse's expression, a thrust of a rhino's head threatening to charge, the outward stare of a pride of cave lions, furtively stalking and ready to pounce, scraping layers of clay to uncover the limestone, sketching and adding dimension in charcoal, painting in pigments with nuance and shading, the artists inspired their creatures to life. In the flickering torchlight, with blackness around them, and their breath alone breaking the silence of the cave, the painters descended the depths of the earth to focus their vision on animals, their behaviors and patterns, the life force within them, and a sense of the deep-rooted kinship we share. In spite of a rock slide 10,000 years later that cached them in rubble for 20,000 more, these paintings convey Chauvet's sacred importance as a place where man pondered his connection with animals. Around the world, from culture to culture, our histories, traditions, and lifestyles as humans intrinsically mingle with animals' lives and many times depend upon them, for giving us food, clothing our bodies, and hauling our belongings around the countryside. Yet at the end of the day, once their roles are fulfilled, we still feel a sense of connection to them. That perennial place that they hold in our psyche, the strength of their image we cherish as symbols, the parts that they play day to day in our lives all exist because of our kinship with them. As our ancestors found in the Grotte Chauvet, we are drawn to bring animals into our lives because we see ourselves reflected in them. Though no doubt the creatures we now see are different from those that once roamed the steppes outside Chauvet, it seems we are no less beguiled by their presence. Nearly 2 out of every 3 American families currently share their homes with pets. This amounts to an impressive 90 million cats, 74 million dogs, 151 million fish, 13 million reptiles, 16 million birds, and 24 million small mammals of sorts. Joining this impressively popular tribe, 4 million families own 1 or more horses, with 3 out of 4 horses living steps from their doors. Reaching much further than the walls of our homes, we thrill at the chance of finding wildlife in nature. Impressions of paw prints emerge from the brambles, wander across our path, and lead off into the shadows. A fresh pile of scat with a few tufts of fur buzzes with flies at the edge of the trail. Claw marks and tree trunks so deep we can't fathom the strength of a bear with the swipe of her paw command our attention. Dare we go further? Due caution forewarns us, but the thought is enticing. Craving more contact than we find in nature, 143 million guests flock to zoos and wild animal parks each year in North America. On paved road safaris through mock African savannas, dark winding trails through lush aviary glens, and footpaths weaving back and forth between a maze of habitats, past impalas, kangaroos, zebras, and bears, we at last catch a glimpse of our favorite creatures, even if we stand apart, behind a fence or across a moat. On a drive up the freeway, To a conference in Boston, I smile as my mind drifts to what lies ahead. Not as much to the meetings as where I'll be staying. A chance to return to a favorite haunt, the Fairmont Copley Plaza Hotel. My delight in this grand old dam lies not in her history or stately decor, but instead in my time spent there with an old friend. The first time I entered the hotel lobby, Katie greeted me with the same doe-eyed look I've come to expect every time I see her. Raised as a puppy since 7 weeks old to serve as a guide dog for the blind, she came to the Fairmont as a 2-year-old lab after a screening before her adoption revealed a small cataract in her left eye. Though her vision, then as now, was essentially sound, aside from the tiniest error at times when tracking a ball tossed high in the air, it disqualified her as a seeing eye dog. Hired as the Copley Plaza's canine ambassador, with an email address, appointment book, and business cards of her very own, Katie commands a devoted clientele for jogs to the Commons, walks around the square, or strolls through the shops of Newbury Street. For me, my day just seems to flow better knowing most times I end up in the lobby. There's a good chance I'll find her there patiently waiting, ready to offer a welcoming wag, a kind-hearted face, and a tummy for petting. A travel-weary, bedraggled couple, spent from their flight with bags still in hand, set all aside to crouch down by Katie and linger a while, petting her on the rug before, and at long last going up to their room. A middle-aged man in a trim business suit on his way to a meeting room somewhere downstairs risks wrinkles and dog hair on his pants sleeves and coat in exchange for a moment to nuzzle with her. The flushed, tear-stained cheeks of a young red-haired girl, perhaps 5 years old, not wanting to go home, break with a smile as Katie leans into her arms. As I watch from a corner, in the course of an hour, a stream of admirers shower Katie with affection. With an opened arms ease saved for familiar friends, they speak to her with bliss squeals of excitement, cooing oos and baby talk, and softly murmured confidences. Furrowed brows wrinkled with worry and stress softly melt as her eyes meet theirs, and she gazes at them with unguarded acceptance. One after another, the change is uncanny. We reach out to people as well as animals out of a longing we hold deep within, to not be alone, to share what we feel, to relate in some way to the world around us. We yearn to be accepted for who we are, warts and all. We spend much of our lives in an unfolding saga, sorting among all the others we meet to find those who we believe best understand us, with whom we can feel free to just be ourselves. Yet with animals, I find, we do so quite differently. By their sides we let down our guard and show them more of who we are. Within the shelter of our own homes, 1/2 to 2/3 of us look on our pets as full-fledged family members. We speak of our pets as if they're our children, invite them into our beds with us, celebrate their birthdays, take them on vacations, and even chat to them on the phone as we leave messages on the answering machine. While we all talk to animals in one way or another, an astounding 94% of us speak to them as if they were human. And more than 90% affirm that our pets indeed respond in turn to our human fancies, emotions, and moods. By the same token, just as many believe our pets share human personality traits, such as being inquisitive, outgoing, or shy. Considering how we regard our connection with them, perhaps it's not surprising at all that slightly more than half of us would willingly risk our lives for our pets, and even more believe that our pets would devotedly rescue us. Based on the findings from a recent survey, should fate somehow leave us for the rest of our days on an island living with one single companion, most of us would choose a dog or a cat above a human, stranger, family, or even best friend. Perhaps even more telling, when asked who listens to you best, almost half of us confess that we feel most heard by our animal companions. And yet, though these may seem remarkable statistics, from the close bonds I've forged with my clients through the years, the stories they've shared, the relationships I've studied, the ties I've witnessed between people and their pets, I simply accept them as a matter of truth. Why would we choose to spend the rest of our lives with a pet as our partner instead of a person? How does an animal simply...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?